Something is happening in Las Vegas that most people are sleeping on. Not the loud stuff, not the Maxx Crosby trade rumors, not the Myles Garrett ripple effect, not Raider Nation splitting itself in half on social media over what this franchise should do next. I'm talking about something quieter than all of that. Something that didn't get a press conference, didn't get a headline, didn't get 30 seconds on any major sports network. 4 front office promotions that got buried under the noise of the week and disappeared from the news cycle before most people even noticed they'd happened. And I want to start there, because until you understand what those moves actually represent, the Crosby conversation, the loud one, the one everybody's having, doesn't make complete sense. John Spytek just promoted Ben Chester to Director of Pro Scouting. 13 seasons inside this organization. Let me sit with that number for a second, because in the context of Raiders history over the last decade, 13 years of continuity inside this building isn't just impressive, it's almost structurally improbable. This franchise has burned through head coaches, cycled through general managers, survived relocation, navigated ownership turbulence, and gone through complete roster demolitions more than once. There were stretches where credible analysts were openly questioning whether this organization could function at a competitive level at all. And through every single one of those cycles, Chester stayed. He stayed, and he absorbed everything. How this organization evaluates talent, which scouts see the game accurately, what the culture inside that building actually is when the cameras aren't rolling. That's not just tenure. That's institutional memory of a kind that cannot be manufactured or imported, and Spytek rewarding it with expanded responsibility at this precise moment in the rebuild tells you exactly how this front office is thinking about organizational continuity. Chester started as a defensive graduate assistant at Wisconsin Stevens Point, moved through football operations at Wisconsin Oshkosh, then spent over a decade inside this system. The new hire with the strong resume and the fresh energy spends year 1 just learning the room, where decisions actually get made, who the trusted voices are, what the real evaluation philosophy looks like when it's being applied rather than described in a media release. Chester already knows that room at a depth that took him more than a decade to reach. Putting him in charge of pro scouting isn't routine housekeeping. It's Spytek making a deliberate statement about what kind of organization this is going to be. Kunal Singh got elevated from Senior Manager of Football Strategy to Director of Football Strategy. And this is only his second year in Las Vegas. He came over from Denver, where he was working as a football data scientist. And the speed of this promotion is what catches my attention. In most front offices, a second-year employee in an analytical support role is still earning credibility, still proving their work translates into decisions that actually move the needle. Singh apparently made enough of an impact in year 1 that the organization decided it wasn't willing to wait another 12 months to give him more influence. That's not how organizations that are drifting operate. That's how organizations that have identified what they're building and are actively trying to accelerate it operate. I know the analytics conversation has a complicated history with certain corners of the fan base, and I'm not dismissing that tension entirely. The concern that reducing football to efficiency metrics strips out everything that actually separates good teams from great ones, the intangibles, the culture, the qualities that don't appear in any model. That's a real argument with real football merit. But the franchises that have sustained competitive relevance over the last decade aren't choosing between instinct and infrastructure. They're doing both simultaneously. They're building front offices where the film evaluators and the data scientists are in the same room, speaking to each other, where the numbers sharpen the conversation rather than replace it. Singh represents that direction. Moving him up after 1 year tells you the work was impactful enough that this front office wanted more of it, faster. Patrick Perilli moved to pro and college scout in his 3rd year, having come through as a player personnel assistant. He played at Wake Forest before transitioning to the front office side. And that matters, because the experience of actually being a player gives your evaluation work a dimension that no amount of film study can fully replicate. Understanding what a player feels when the protection breaks down, what the mental load of a complex scheme actually does to a quarterback, what separates a player who can perform the technique from one who can sustain it under pressure. That's knowledge that lives in the body, not just the notebook. Jonah Lubin moved from football data science assistant to football data scientist in his 2nd season. Another accelerated timeline, another signal that the quality of the work earned it. None of these 4 names are going to move a ticker. Not one of them is going to lead a highlight package or generate engagement on a sports timeline. But taken together, Chester's 13 years of organizational knowledge being formalized into expanded authority, Singh's analytical capability being elevated at speed, Perilli and Lubin being developed deliberately into roles that reflect what modern winning front offices actually look like. What you're seeing is systematic reconstruction of every operational layer of this organization at once. Coaching staff, roster construction, scouting infrastructure, analytics capacity, development philosophy, all of it being rebuilt simultaneously with a coherent vision running through the entire thing. That's not a franchise making adjustments and hoping something sticks. That's a franchise deciding who it wants to be before worrying about what the record says. Spidek said something publicly that I keep returning to because I think it's the most honest window into how this front office actually thinks. He pointed to the Patriots winning 4 games before going to the Super Bowl the following year. He pointed to Washington going from the 2nd overall pick straight to the NFC Championship. His point wasn't that Las Vegas is about to make a dramatic turnaround on a short timeline. His point was that the structure has to come first, and when the structure is right, the results follow it. That's a belief system, not a timeline promise. And every significant move this organization has made this offseason, including the 4 quiet promotions that nobody wrote about, reflects that belief in concrete, specific, deliberate ways. Now let's talk about Maxx Crosby, because the room just shifted, didn't it? The official organizational position, stated on the record by Clint Kubiak, is that Crosby is expected to be a Raider in 2026. That's where Las Vegas stands publicly, and I want to be honest about why that statement doesn't end the conversation, because it absolutely does not. Earlier this offseason, it was confirmed, not speculated, confirmed, that the Raiders front office had actual discussions with the Baltimore Ravens about a potential Crosby trade. That's documented organizational history. Not fan speculation, not anonymous sourcing from someone's cousin. An actual conversation that happened at the front office level between 2 NFL franchises about moving one of the premier pass rushers in the league. Once you know that conversation took place in reality, the topic stops being hypothetical. It already existed in the real world, which means it stays entirely legitimate to examine seriously, regardless of what the current public statement says. And then Myles Garrett got traded to the Rams. Cleveland moved one of the best edge rushers in football, got a first-round pick and Jared Verse coming back. And the second that deal became official, every Raiders conversation I was paying attention to pivoted immediately. If Cleveland extracted that return for Garrett, what does the realistic market for Crosby look like? And more importantly, is that return more valuable to this specific rebuild than keeping him on the roster is? The hypothetical packages that have been circulating are worth engaging with seriously, because the level of specificity attached to them tells you something real about how other front offices are actually thinking. One scenario centers on San Francisco, built around the 49ers' 2027 first-round pick, Michael Williams, and supplemental second-round picks in 2027 and 2028. Variations of that package include Alfred Collins or Osa Odigizua. If Las Vegas wanted defensive line continuity built directly into the return, the Washington Commanders have surfaced in other versions, with packages potentially involving Gyron Newton or Josh Connolly Jr. at offensive tackle alongside first-round compensation and additional picks. None of this is moving, none of this is official, but conversations with this level of detail don't circulate through the league randomly. There are teams thinking carefully about what Crosby is worth, running the math on what it would cost to acquire him, even if the Raiders aren't actively picking up the phone right now. Let me tell you where I actually stand, because I think this deserves more than the emotionally satisfying answer. Barring something so genuinely extraordinary that declining it would represent a failure of basic front office responsibility, a package so tilted in Las Vegas's favor that it rewrites the entire roster's future in a single transaction. I don't want Maxx Crosby playing somewhere else, and I want to be clear that this isn't loyalty dressed up as analysis. It's rooted in something real that I think gets underweighted every time this conversation happens. Players who compete the way Crosby competes, with that motor, with that standard, with that complete refusal to let the scoreboard, or the standings, or the organizational chaos around him affect how he shows up on any given Sunday, those players do not appear in the market on any predictable schedule. You can draft for pass rush, you can evaluate prospects with every tool available. You can spend first-round picks on edge rushers for 5 consecutive years and still never land someone who brings to a locker room what he brings to this one, because what Crosby carries into that building every day isn't just production. It's a standard, it's a living example, visible to every younger player around him, of what it actually looks like to compete at full intensity regardless of circumstances. That quality cannot be acquired with draft capital. It cannot be installed through a coaching program. It either exists in a player at that level or it doesn't. And in Crosby, it absolutely does. Think about what this defense looks like structurally without him, not just in terms of stats, but in terms of what it communicates to every offensive coordinator preparing for Las Vegas. Fernando Mendoza is developing. The offense is still finding its identity under a first-year coordinator and a quarterback who hasn't taken an NFL regular season snap yet. This team is going to experience growing pains in 2026. That's not a pessimistic read. That's just what rebuilds look like at this stage of the process. During those growing pains, the defense needs an anchor. It needs a player who forces every opposing offensive coordinator to account for him specifically in game planning, whose presence alone creates problems that have to be solved before the game even starts. The attention Crosby demands, the adjusted protections, the doubled assignments, the resources devoted exclusively to neutralizing him on a given week, creates opportunities for every other player on that defensive front that simply disappear the moment he's no longer generating them. His value doesn't live only in his own stat line. It lives in the entire defensive ecosystem around him. At the same time, and I genuinely mean this, not as a disclaimer, I understand the counter-argument well enough to take it seriously. Building around Mendoza requires a specific resource allocation logic. Every significant roster decision has to be filtered through a central question. What actually accelerates this quarterback's development and maximizes the window he'll have once he arrives at his ceiling? And there is a real, legitimate version of the rebuilding case that says the draft capital available in a Crosby deal serves that timeline more directly than his presence does. 2 first-round picks in the 2027 range, a young starting caliber player coming back in the return. That's not a minor thing. That's foundational roster-building capital of exactly the kind that championship windows get constructed from. If SpyTech genuinely believes that capital converts into players who serve Mendoza's long-term development more effectively than Crosby's presence does over the next 2 seasons, that's a legitimate football argument. It deserves honest engagement rather than reflexive dismissal. But here's where I keep landing every time I try to look at this without my own attachment to the player getting in the way. Patience is the philosophy. That's the through line connecting everything happening in Las Vegas right now. And patience, applied to this specific question, doesn't automatically resolve in one direction. Sometimes holding your best player and trusting the roster around him to develop up to his level is patience. Sometimes accepting a short-term sacrifice for long-term compounding capital is patience. The philosophy frames the question correctly. It doesn't hand you the answer. What I find genuinely compelling, and what I think most of the coverage has missed, is the way these 2 storylines are actually the same storyline arriving from different directions. The front office restructuring and the Crosby debate are running through the exact same organizational nerve. The Chester promotion after 13 seasons of accumulated knowledge, Singh's acceleration after 1 year of meaningful contribution, Perilli and Lubin being developed deliberately into roles that reflect what winning organizations actually look like in this era of the league. Every one of those moves reflects a front office thinking in years and draft classes, not in news cycles and immediate optics. They're building internal machinery that allows good decisions to be made consistently, over time, independent of who happens to be on the roster at any given moment. The Crosby question is whether that same long-game philosophy is prepared to absorb a painful short-term cost in exchange for something that compounds over a longer window. And the honest answer is that both positions, keeping him, trading him, can be argued from within the same organizational vision without contradicting it. What ultimately resolves the question isn't the philosophy itself. It's the specific judgment of the people inside that building about which version of patience actually serves Mendoza's future most effectively. That's a judgment call, and it belongs to SpyTech. What I know, standing here right now with everything I've been watching, is that this is not the Raiders organization it was 2 years ago. Not in record, not in roster construction, not in the culture inside the building. The Chester promotion after 13 seasons of real investment in this organization. Singh's role being expanded after 1 year of making the work matter. Perilli and Lubin being moved forward on deliberate, accelerated timelines because the people evaluating them see something worth developing faster. These are not reactive moves. These are not desperate moves. These are the moves of a front office that has a genuine, specific picture of what it's constructing and is placing the right people in the right seats with intention behind each decision. Whether Crosby is still in silver and black when training camp opens is a question only SpyTech and Kubiak can answer. And right now, the answer is yes. But the history of that Baltimore conversation, the market precedent established by the Garrett deal, the specificity of the packages circulating around the league, None of that fades because the public position holds firm. This is a live question. It will keep developing. And when it does, the only framework that makes sense to evaluate it through is the same quiet, structural, patient philosophy that just expressed itself through 4 front office promotions. Most people didn't read past the headline. Build it right. Reward the people who've earned it. Integrate what sustainable success looks like in this era of the NFL. Trust the long view, even when the short view is loud and emotionally charged and demanding a decision right now. That's Las Vegas right now. And the Crosby question is about to show everyone watching whether that philosophy holds when it actually costs something or whether it bends.